All right. Welcome, everyone. Let's see why I'm echoing here. Hmm.
Echo?
Okay. Does that sound better?
I couldn't hear the echo before,
Okay,
so
good, good, good.
yeah.
All right.
Do I have an echo?
No, no, no.
Good. Okay.
Okay. Let's just give everyone a minute or two. But I am super excited for this. This is going to be a good one.
Yeah. Well, it's always fun to talk to you, so I'm excited to talk to you.
Right? It's funny. I've been bringing a lot of clients onto my chats here because, there's things we can all share. I had one a few weeks ago, and Katie was this job seeker who thinks really differently about job searching, very creatively.
Hmm.
So that was a fun one. But yeah, this is my latest thing is just pulling our clients in to see what they can share with the world, right? We are all working on things, but there are things you've done that someone else may have not. So that is why we're here.
It's good stuff. I mean, I think one of the great things about what you do is that you do get to talk to so many people and learn so much about, just what the different things people do to make it in the workforce. And so it's just you're lucky to have the breadth of knowledge that way.
Yeah, it's so true. I think one of the biggest things I have is perspective because I hear all the stories all day. So it's a fun job. Um, but yeah, welcome everybody. I'm gonna just get started while people keep trickling in. Thank you for joining. My name is Rachel Serwetz, and I'm the founder and CEO and career coach at Woken. We are excited to be back on Fishbowl. We've had countless talks on here. I've stopped counting, but it's always a good time. So for future events, you can click on my profile to be notified of future conversations. And today we are here with another chat as part of our Navigating the Workplace series. So we pull back the curtain on important topics so that you all as professionals can really navigate your careers, and we try to just be as raw and honest as humanly possible about anything you need to know. So today we're going to dive into the art of side hustles, freelancing, consulting, juggling different clients, juggling different jobs, and just what does that all mean, right? Like a lot of people are in this like searching for full-time work, but what are the other ways to do work, right? So that's what we're going to talk about. And Sharon is here as a guest speaker, and she's going to illuminate some of her stories and her experiences that will help you all get some ideas going for yourself. So we're going to do that chat for about 40 minutes, and then we are going to leave it open to audience Q&A for the end 20 minutes. And so for that, you can, we welcome participation in two ways. Either raise your hand to join the stage. There's a button that you can do that, or you can DM me and I will keep your name anonymous. And just if you are going to raise your hand, please enable your microphone. So I will super quickly just introduce myself, and then Sharon will do the same.
Hmm.
My journey, I started out at Goldman Sachs, and then I moved over to Bridgewater Associates. So I was in operations and then recruiting and performance management, but I was career coaching on the side of my job for years. And then I pretty much have been starting my company ever since for the past 6.5 years. And I am a career coach, so I help a wide variety of professionals with a very wide variety of goals and challenges. I also did a tech MBA at NYU Stern, and I've also taught an entrepreneurship class. So even speaking of freelancing, I've done it myself, entrepreneurship and sort of working different gigs for different companies. So I have that experience, as does Sharon. But that is me. And yeah, Sharon, please just give us a quick intro to who you are, and then we'll
Yeah.
dive into the questions.
Yeah, I mean, generally I'm a senior communications, content, and investor relations pro, and I've for years been a key C-level advisor for global organizations across finance and tech primarily. I started out my road back in the day as a financial journalist for the Wall Street Journal in the late '90s and early thousands, and I always kind of maintained this communications. Company basically on the side it was my side hustle, and then but it's now emerged as my primary hustle. And basically I help people parse complicated ideas and make them more accessible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
love that. Cool. So we're going to just dive straight into it, right? So today's job search market, right? The traditional is looking for a full time job, right? And that has become very difficult to do. So I like to get creative for a job seeker. Even if you're doing some part time gig as an interim strategy, I want to open people's mind to the possibilities of where you can make money and lend your skills. It doesn't have to be full time, right? So, Sharon, can you just sort of let us know, like, what are the different formats you've worked in, right? So you've had full time, but other ways
Yep.
to do things, whether it's your own company. I know you've done some teaching,
Yep.
freelancing, consulting, retainers. Like, what are the styles of sort of how you've actually just worked, whether it's for a client or for an organization or whoever, just so we get the lay of the land of the different ways that you've worked over
Yeah.
the years.
Sure. Well, I mean, now, under the aegis of my side hustle, it's become my main hustle, Clear Communications. I've worked in all sorts of formats. It really depends on what, what the client requires and, how we tailor the contract to meet those needs. So, I basically come up with a scope of work for each client and then the base, whether we agree upon, and then we sort of decide it from there. Is that a part-time? Is that 60%? Is that 40% that fit into my overall time constraints and requirements? And so basically, though, very simply, I mean, I've worked part time, I've worked full time, I've worked on contract, I've worked per piece, even during content, but or speeches, less so. And it's sort of it gives me the wonderful flexibility to sort of make it up as I need it to be as I go. There's a
Yeah.
lot of flexibility in that. Yeah.
Well, that makes a lot of sense because I think with the job search market, we like look for this open role online and we apply and we already kind of know what the contract is because it says it's full time. We may or may not know the salary, but you're kind of saying, I try to meet a client or I try to meet a company and then I see what they need. And then I see what is that contract? Is it full time or what percent of my time are they looking for? So you're leading with this entrepreneurial, way to find work. And then you can figure out how that transpires into reality. I love that lens because right? What is a job? We're looking to make money. We're looking to lend our skills and lend value. Like I want to sort of help people come away from like, oh, I'm just looking at these online job boards and you're still finding work. It's just I lead with where are these companies? Who are the people? What do they need help with? And then let's format that and let's structure that and let's figure out what works for them. And there's probably a lot of companies that didn't even know they were searching for certain help and then you meet them and you network with them and you see where that leads. So I love just leading with the people and the problem and the work, and then you figure out the money, right? Like where there's a need, the compensation will
Yeah.
follow.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, yeah, obviously it's thinking for them about what percentage of time they're looking for me, but it's also thinking about like what fits into my schedule too. Does this work for me? Do I have the bandwidth to get this done? Do I have the subcontractors in line that could help me out with this, uh, given that framework or not? So it's also me picking and
Mm-hmm.
choosing too.
Mm-hmm.
And so everyone basically has like the best, everyone's doing their best work, whether, I'm doing it for the client or and they're giving me their time or I'm giving it to them. Yeah. Just
Yeah. Right. I mean, I love that because both parties have the ultimate choice when you're crafting the contract together versus, again, full time. It's just so rigid. But, the entrepreneurial nature means we can make this in a way that works for everyone. And that's really how it always should be. So I love that. I love that so much. And yeah, I mean, like, as much as it may not feel like a candidate's market, in full time. If you think about it this way, it's very much a candidate's market because you could go out and decide, what work you want to bring in or not, right? It's just thinking about it differently. So, Sharon, what
yeah.
got you started in like your first ever freelance gig? Like, how did you come about that?
That goes back like honestly almost 2 decades. But it was I was a journalist at the time, and somebody in my newsroom who was a mentor to me said, "Hey, I'm doing this sort of like work on the side. These tech CEOs need some speeches. Can you help me out? I have too much to do."
Mm,
And that's basically it. And so, and then from there, it's just basically been so much of how this has grown has been word of mouth. But it was sort of just seeing like, let me try that. Let me see if I'm any good at that. Let me see if it's possible. And then and it worked. And you just sort of taking it from there and thinking
right.
about what, yeah.
I love that. Like, find a mentor who's a little more
Hmm.
senior, but they're in your
Yeah.
space and they probably have way too much to do and
Yeah.
just like hitch to their bandwagon. I love that. And, for you,
Yeah.
it might have felt serendipitous, but this is the lesson that someone can go pursue. And that's an idea of where to find the need. Who has too little capacity and too much demand? That might be somebody in your world, a mentor, a previous colleague, a previous manager, a previous director, a previous boss. And just, of course, we always talk about networking, but that's a great way to frame it, for other people. When you think about pros and cons, right? Like, were you
Hmm.
ever debating, like, I know, you were searching at one point, and full-time roles, salaried roles were a part of your agenda, but like, how do you think about full-time versus part-time, pros and cons? Like, what was your thought process, like, deciding between the two? Or, I mean, of course, part-time can give such flexibility, which I think we're already alluding to,
Hmm.
but you got to go find your leads and find your clients, and the
Yeah.
financials, it can feel unstable sometimes. So how do you think about the, difference between like full-time, part-time, and what does that mean to you?
Well, yeah. I mean that's well. I think you sort of raised to one of the cons actually of freelance right there is like finding the leads and the clients. Like that is, I mean, that is a job in itself actually. And in leaner times, that's a lot more of my time. Allotted to hustling and networking and finding the project, and that goes back to then sort of what you're talking about, like you're looking for too many people with too little capacity and too much demand, and trying to meet that need. So that's one con of freelance. But a con of the full time for me, and I think for others as well, is just needing the flexibility. I mean, I think less and less we're tied to desks from 9 to 5. But I needed to be able, like, I've long, even when I have had a full time role, I've already always usually worked with people or with an organization that trusted me to finish my work when I was going to finish my work. I've never really been especially tied to a desk. And so I guess, I've just created my own flexibility by having my own company, basically. And that was very important to me. Um, yeah, but I mean, another con, obviously, of the freelance stuff is health insurance, right? Like, I don't, right now, like, I don't do that myself. I don't do it for the people that work for me. So I'm on the marketplace. That's not a positive thing. And I guess like another con would simply be that, like, it's hard to take a vacation.
Right.
There's nobody to do it for me when I'm away. Although,
Right.
I find that you can create that yourself too. And I think people think of like freelance stuff as not really like, creating these permanent relationships or even people that you work with, but they are. Many of my clients are people I've worked with for many years, and I would say many of my subcontractors are also people that I've worked with for many years, and not just in this capacity, but also in full time capacity. And when I moved on to something else, maybe I brought their skills with me because they wanted a
Right.
side hustle too.
Right.
So
I
yeah,
love this. It's so amazing. Yeah. Leaning on your existing network, like, where are they now? What are they doing? Like, thinking about any and all past colleagues, these are your people, these are
yeah,
your cohort. I mean, if they're doing the work that you still want to be doing, but finding people that you've worked with and bringing them along for the ride, and just, experimenting and bringing people in. If you bring them in, they'll bring you in, right? So
yeah,
building those strong ties and that strong network, and just thinking about people in your world in a new way. Where are they now? How can we collaborate,
yeah,
and get creative? Like, I always go out, for me, I do a lot of partnerships with complementary organizations, but I'll often go out to other like career coaches and I say, how can we collab? Like, how can we help each other? So just thinking with your entrepreneurial hat on when you are quote unquote job searching, and the people around you are your peers, they're your colleagues. Even if you're not in the same organization right now, they can be, you can think of them that way. They're
yeah,
sort of the peers in your market. How can you work together? What do they have going on? Maybe they want to team up with you and you could go find clients together and
yeah.
start your own little mini agency. You don't have to do it all on your own. I was chatting with a client who's in the sales world, and she was chatting with a previous colleague who started a small little agency, right? So you never know kind of where people stand and the ways that you could team up and bring people along. I love that. Sharon, the financials are a piece of this, right? Like
Oh, well,
people
yeah,
get
there's that too.
really stressed about like, what if, like how do I start? Now, first of all, if you're already unemployed, great, there's literally no better time to be entrepreneurial. But if you are sort of working full time, you can sort of build this up on the side. But when you're thinking about, let's call it, those in between downturn times when you're maybe drumming up new clients, I think people struggle a lot with how am I going to keep the financials going, and could this correlate to my full time salary? But I think the activities are so similar to what you'd have to do to go find full time work or part time work that it's kind of just like what's your strategy and what's your approach and what's worth your time. If you're looking for work anyway, open yourself up to the different styles and varieties of what that could look like. But yeah, I think people really stress about the financials. Can I support myself doing this? How do I set my rates? How did you think about the numbers behind like getting this all going and
Yeah.
supporting yourself with sort of part-time freelance clients?
Yeah, sure. I mean, can I support myself? Yeah, of course. Like that's a concern, but I would say like yeah, you definitely can. I mean, and I do. I mean, I presently correlate it to what I know, like what a full time salary would be, and I correlate it to that. And that's one way to do it. I mean, but other ways is, I mean, it was a little bit easier for me because I used to work in a PR agency for a while, and I know what my hourly rate was there, and then sort of calculating that, to adjust it, inflation adjusted, so I had a clue about that. I was worried when I first started out. I was like, are people going to pay that? Like, when you go into an agency, you have like the full agency behind you. Are people going to pay that? Oh my God. Like, should I be asking that? A little bit and then, but you know what? Yeah, you should be. You'd be surprised. And
Right.
if you have, I mean, use your existing reputation, use your existing network. People know you. And yeah, they know the good work you do. So you just are doing it in a different framework. That's all.
Yeah, and if you're not sure about rates, I'm a
Yeah.
big fan of networking. Like find a few peers that have done freelancing and get a rough, like what is the market standard range,
Yeah.
hourly rate or monthly retainer for this type of service and for this level and my tenure and my background and my credibility, right? So you can do your own little market research on pricing and positioning and rates and kind of what's out there to understand where you fall. I love Upwork is a great site for part-time work, and you can also just see other people's profiles and who's charging what. So if you want to be fair, do that market research on what you can charge. But it is a bit of a learning game. Anything with entrepreneurship, it is trial and error a little bit. So,
Yeah.
you set that first price, you do a little research, you set that first price, and you see their reaction. And I also think depending on your clientele, what
Yeah.
is their budget? You can always say, what's your budget? You can even say that before you set a price. So you're gonna get creative and you're gonna learn on the fly. But I think it requires a little comfort to sort of build the car while you're driving it and just trial and error. And look, if you can have a full-time salary, you can also translate that into like on Google. I'm often doing this myself. I'm like, what is X salary in terms of an hourly rate? Like you can just literally do that math right on Google. If that's one of many research tactics, right? But you can still get a pulse on like what's fair, what makes sense, and by the way, there's different styles or business models. Would you charge monthly or hourly, or what's your package, right? Things like that. And that could depend on what is the best for your client, what is the best for you, how do
Yeah.
you want to structure it. But just trying something, and worst case, you can always ask the client and say, how have you structured this before? Do you prefer for it to be monthly or based on project or based on time? Asking questions is a great downfall because you'll just hear how they typically do it. That doesn't mean it's how you have to do it. But if you're like, I've never done this, just ask questions and then you'll see what do they typically do, you know?
Well, yeah, I mean, and I totally agree with that. I mean, I do ask my clients, like when people are, we're going through a proposal and we're beginning to think about working together, I do ask them what their budget is. Just because I also want to know that they've thought about how they're going to pay for this. And I want to know that the answer to that question also often gives me, what buy-in do they have from the rest of the company to actually take on these sets of actions, and is there support for it? Is there not? Because then that also can be sort of an indicator of like how long the contract will be, or if this really is going to get signed or not. Yeah, so I agree with you asking questions. I have no problem asking questions. I think people also want to get into a good deal for themselves too, but then they know
Right.
that yeah, so it
Right.
works.
And thinking about the longevity, right? The relationship, you can even say, look, if this is 3 months versus 6 months versus, here's what we can do in these different types of contracts.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, you want to think about kind of the retention piece. There was something else I was going to say and I totally forgot.
Oh,
But yeah, no,
well,
no, this is good. This is
yeah.
good.
Well, and like
So, Sharon, tell us
if
about like acquiring your first clients, right? Like, I think people struggle with this a lot.
yeah.
Like, how did you do it in the beginning? And what is your approach now if you're searching for a new client?
Okay. Well, oh, wow, that's a big question. Well, I mean, my very first client was basically, like I said, through a mentor.
Right,
And then
right, right, right.
beyond that, it just began sort of word of mouth and shaking my network, saying like, "Hey, I did this for this person. Do you need this?" And recognizing needs, and similar needs. Um, I would say when I sort of really put my full energy into the Cleary communications, it happened. I basically tapped my undergraduate and graduate school networks. Actually, is what I did, and just began to talking to people and seeing who needed what, who's working in what fields. Um, yeah, and I was looking mostly at larger corporates, who's working there. That was basically it. That's basically how I did it. And again, it's so much of this, right? For anyone I think is run a business, it's just often just getting the first one, and that will roll into more often. I do, though, also now kind of, I've been raising my, using LinkedIn more often to sort of tout what I'm doing a bit more. And things have found I was very effective in people coming to me. So that's wonderful, actually. So.
I love that. Um, yeah, any other marketing strategies that feel effective to promote your services? Anything else
Well,
that kind of brings in clients for you?
sure. I mean, you know what I do? I also do like areas that I'm interested in being more involved in. Like I've now sort of gotten much more involved with climate finance in the last, I don't know, 8 months. And that was me then identifying conferences and events and attending them, whether they were online or in person, and just, being a vocal supporter of the community and showing up and getting people to know me. And that, I mean, some of those cases, I mean, I might have even started some of those relationships a year ago, and like 6 months later, or even yesterday, I'm talking to them about a project we're going to start next week. So it's always also, I think, taking the long view is really, really important. It might not be what you do that month that's going to lead to a client, like, from June to July, but it might be something suddenly you're going to start in December. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, proactive. It's pipeline building, it's business development, it's sales, right? So if anyone has
This
that type
sales.
of experience, you can lend that, this is part of. But when you think about it, the irony is, you're networking anyway for full time, right? So it's just all the same networking that you can do, just a little different to open yourself up to different types of
Excellent.
projects.
100%. 100%. Yeah.
How long do you see a contract lasting for, right? So like shortest and longest,
Sure.
and how do you typically like to structure your projects? Because I think part of this is like, what's the main difference between full time work, in theory has no end date, although there's these unprecedented or rather unpredictable layoffs, right? And so, with a contract, at least you know when it's ending. You know what I mean? You don't have the
Mhm.
surprise factor. But tell us the range and the length of how long you typically work with a client.
Okay. Well, that generally, I would say the clients that I have, I mean, they do rotate in and out, but generally I have clients I was just trying to think, because I have extreme outliers. I have people that have been my clients for like, I would actually seriously 20 years, which is crazy. But it's all relationship based. But I'd say generally it's probably about 3 to 4 years, is
Wow.
is where we are. And just
But so
because.
when you're signing an initial contract, though,
Yeah.
Are they signing for 3 years, or is it shorter and then they're like
Oh,
returning and
that's a
coming?
good point. It's usually like I'm usually signing for some. I mean, I've actually signed stuff for the shortest you asked was like 3 months, and I'm still working with them like about 3 years later. So you know,
I love that. That is honestly the epitome of everything that this entire talk should just be, right? Think about it, right? Full time roles, people are changing jobs every 1 or 2 or 3 years. This thing that quote unquote on paper was 3 months, people are so scared of a short freelance contract when Sharon, when you added value, now they're sticking around for 3 years. Like, I just love the idea of the control that you can have behind your income and your career with, like, you know what clients you add value to, and when you actually add value, you drive the retention and the longevity of the work and the income that you bring in. Like, that sense of control, like, I think that's the job market we're in right now. I think that we need to take back the power and the control as a candidate and become an entrepreneur, whether you were ready for it or not. And I'm not saying that everyone has to go do this. Definitely not saying that. If you're better suited for full time work, you absolutely can search for that. But if you are listening on this talk, I want you to just be open minded to instead of the fear behind it, the power that can come behind what Sharon just said, the 3 month contract that turned into a 3 year contract, or the fact that she's had clients with her for 20 years. So, like, yes, there might be some fluctuation. But if you have one client, who are the other companies and the other people that need the same thing? Right? So when you think
yeah.
about full-time work, you're looking at this open job online versus sometimes part-time work. It may not be posted. It's
Hmm.
like the unposted, where's the value, where's the need? So you might need to find those people and have a conversation if there wasn't some posted project. But it's the same idea behind, how do I add value? And I'm just going to be a little more creative to structure this than the typical, online posting. And by the way, these online postings, sometimes I see things that are posted that was meant for an internal promotion, or there's so much noise on the job boards, and if it's not working for you, thinking about it in these other ways, like, that is just so powerful. 3 months turned into 3 years, and the 20-year client. I mean, I just can't get over that, because I think people really need to rethink in these terms.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I mean, I didn't expect it to turn out this way either. But it's, but it's, and like you said, that whether you're ready for it or not. I mean, but I have to admit, it's a lot of fun this way. I actually really enjoy it. I'm always, I mean, I might be working on the same projects with a client for 3 years, or it might be a different project every 6 months. And like, but I find one of the most important pieces of this is that with my clients, when I identify them, when we're talking about working together, can I communicate with them? Can they communicate with me?
Mm,
Because so much of this success is being able to sort of, hey, to manage expectations all the time,
yeah.
and in a
Well, that
fair.
is the interesting piece, because when you choose to have your own business, right? You want to deliver a successful contract, you want to deliver value. So now, instead of them interviewing you like a full-time role, which of course you should always ask questions, but it's mostly them making you an offer. In this case, you want to be more inclined to really not just interview them back, but say, am I the right fit for you? Can I
Yeah.
communicate with you? And am I going to be successful in this gig? Because it's now on your brand and your time. And if you can't work with that client for whatever reason, or can't deliver results, it's more worth it for you to say no. And actually building a referral, like affiliate network, you could refer them to someone else if you're not the right fit for them. But
Mhm.
that's another different way of thinking when you're doing more freelancing. It's so important to make sure you're setting yourself up for success versus taking on something that doesn't make sense for you. So,
Yeah.
Sharon, like, what helps you get to know if it's a client you want to take on?
Hmm. Wow, wow. Well, first, actually, I wanted to touch really quickly, like on like the referrals to others, just to say that I've done that too, and that's
Yeah.
all part of the networking thing of like you put something out there, you help somebody else, and you don't know that'll come back to you in some way at some time. I really believe in that sort of stuff.
Right.
But
They'll refer people to you.
yeah, I'm sorry, but what was your question there? I'm sorry, I missed it.
How do you know if a client is someone like you want to work with? Like, do you vet them? Like, what do you look for?
I
Green
do
flags,
vet.
red flags? Like,
Yeah.
has there ever been a client that you're like, you said no to working with?
Yeah, yeah. I see if basically, I do vet them. And that's, of course, looking on their social media, both personal and of their company. I try and look for people that have worked with them before and maybe I generally like people that are referred to me for that reason, because then they're already kind of past, like jumped through a hoop. And for all those reasons, I mean, not because they're not, great. It's just because, am I the right person for them? I might not be. And, it's not, I don't want to waste anyone's time, not my own, not theirs. Um, but red flags are often be like, I mean, honestly, if they haven't paid their subcontractors, that would be something that I would like to find out. And I used to be an investigative journalist, so I can figure that out usually. Um, and and also like I want to know if like their expectations, what they've written for me. Usually they've submit an idea, like I have them write it out. Like, what kind of what scope of work, what projects are you hoping to accomplish? And then I hear them talk about them, and I like to hear it to see if they're aligned to a
Yeah.
certain degree. And it's because sometimes they're actually really, really not. Or yeah, and so a lot of it's listening. I can't say that I can eliminate the risk, by doing that, but I can definitely make I think, have the experience now to make more educated conclusions and decide whether it's the right thing for me or not.
Right. And like
Often
hearing what you're not hearing, like to some extent, like their tone, like if they sound like they're all over the place and chaotic, I mean it's just like any full-time job where you're asking them questions, but in this case it's more severe to the sense that like you can say no, you
you
might
can say
want to
no.
say
Yeah.
no, and you might need to say no. So just taking that extra layer of caution of like, who are they, how do they operate, how do you operate, and start building a checklist of questions that you can use to vet. And I think it'll help you get to know, if that's a client you want to work with, and or how to succeed with that client. So just taking a deeper dive, and they'll be impressed that you're asking all these questions anyway.
Yeah.
So starting to trust yourself, because the power of saying no becomes more important, right? When we have a full-time job offer, it becomes, we want to say yes, and it becomes a question of, should I say yes, versus in this case, it's you actually want to be as careful as humanly possible.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about your day to day, Sharon. Like when you are, in a situation where you're working with maybe two or three clients at the same time. How do you manage all of that? Like, what what,
Um,
what helps you with staying organized on all of that?
Well, I mean, actually, something that you've taught me was time blocking. I do that. I have a lot of to-do lists. Well, actually, I have one primary one, and I write it out on Sundays to prepare myself for the week. There is a fair bit of time juggling, but when I have a roadmap ahead of me, it actually is pretty simple. I mostly work from home, although I do travel for meetings. I was in DC a couple of weeks ago. I was in New York City earlier this week, excuse me. And yeah, it's basically just really laying out and having clear scopes of work ahead of time with each client. There's just
Mm,
I can't do that otherwise. I need to know, like, what are the expectations, what are our deadlines, what are our deliverables, and I have that drawn out like 6 months in advance. And of course those change sometimes, but we talk about them and we change them, and then fit that into my schedule. If it gets really tight, for instance, then I'm looking into. I already work with I have one subcontractor that's just a friend's side hustle. It's their social media company. She used to be the head of social for an agency and we were friends from there. And so, do I need to bring her in on this project? Do I need to bring other people in on this project based if I have too much going on? If I have too little, then we're scaling it back a little bit.
right,
Or I'm not, maybe that's not the month that I'm going to be buying like the online listening software. So, and that's okay.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
And as much
Yeah,
as
I think
possible, I try and put those costs on the
organization is
client.
key. And I mean, as you can see, we're just doubling down here on that original scoping. You have to really go slow and be really detailed with the original, what are the expectations, right? Because when you're in a full-time
Yeah.
job, if expectations are not clear, you have all the time in the world to chat with your manager. But if you're on the hook for getting paid for a
Yep.
certain deliverable, you need all that upfront strategy work of the scope, the statement of work, whatever it is, and just get really deep and really crystal clear on what they expect in the beginning, which I think goes such a long way. And I think, people don't always know exactly what they need. So, when you're
Yes.
it's interesting because it can be a sales tactic to first build out that scope of work with them, which is helping them clarify what they need. They may not even know. It
Yeah.
helps you get bought into the project because you're clearly helping them define what they need and how that even should get done. Um, but it's interesting. There's probably a balance between the initial proposal and then maybe when you come on board, you go the extra mile to project plan even deeper. Because you don't want to spend so many weeks just doing scoping before you've even signed the
Yeah,
contract. So I think there's that happy medium of like, what do you need me to do? Is this clear? And then once you get in, make it even more clear and just, having yourself set up expectations, timelines. It's so much more important
yeah,
to be able to deliver, right? Because when you're full time, they can give you like constructive feedback, and it's not, I mean, being let go. I mean, for performance or could be real, but in this case, if you're not delivering, you really got to look at your contract. So understanding expectations and scoping so much more important.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and sometimes even like if it isn't, I mean, I like what you said about, like that people don't know what they need sometimes, and it's true that. But I sort of build that into like the first month of a contract, often coming up with a narrative and messaging framework, and that process itself often clarifies what the scope of work is after that. When we refine it, usually after that point. But I'm also gauging whether or not like they're going to be willing to participate in that. A lot of what I do in communications, investor relations, is people are thinking what they want their brand to be, how they want to put themselves out there, what they want to be identified as, and I'm often holding up that mirror and being like, okay, this is what we actually look like now, and sometimes that's different from what they think they do, and so a lot of this is also sort of guiding them through a bit of an identity process too. Anyway, but
Yeah.
bit of
But
an
I
aside.
think what you said is important about are they willing, like, say you
Yes.
have an exercise that is strategic. If a client's willing to do that or not, that's another flag that shows you whether you want to work with them or not. Because if there's a strategic upfront process that you typically do to set a client up for success, if they're not willing to do that, right, maybe this project isn't going to go well in the end.
Hmm.
So I think that's important to like sort of stand your ground. I mean, of course, some level of flexibility. It depends on their goal, but standing your ground with like, here's what I know we need to do, and what are they open to allowing you to have your expertise and roll with your process. The way you're coming in to guide and add value. So what's their openness to you helping them get to their goal?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
Sharon, how did you think about your niche and like which clients specifically to go after? Like, I think for you with communications, there's probably like anyone that could need that. So, do you think about size and stage of business? Do you think about industry? Like, how did you, or did you just go with, where you had previous expertise? Like, how do you figure out kind of what or who exactly to target?
I started and I still do previous areas of expertise. And so, I mean, most of my clients are in finance and tech. I mean, years ago, that's what I used to cover. And I've just been sort of looking at it now for a couple of, decades, writing about it, helping people think about it. But I mean, in those spaces, a lot has changed, and a lot changes quickly. So there are spaces that I've finance and tech are areas I've worked in for years, but they're always new.
Yeah.
I mean, climate finance didn't really exist a couple years ago. I mean, now, everyone's talking about AI. That wasn't around. I mean,
Right.
5 years ago.
Right.
So
There's
it,
definitely an
yeah,
evolution, but
yeah, yeah.
with freelancing, the easiest way to get started, leaning on your expertise and just offering it in a more private sort of consulting sort of way. I mean, that's an easy way to get started. And then to your point, it evolves, and you can still show transferable skills across industries. But, like I always say, there's role, there's industry, there's environment.
Hmm.
So think about your role and your areas of expertise, and then think about industries you're aware of and environments, size or stage of company that you're familiar with, right? So translating experiences into, what other companies, can this be relevant to? Um, Sharon, do you feel like people ask you questions about, when you're selling yourself, like how you're different from some other person? Like, how do you kind of stand out? How do you get them to pick you if they're looking at other people to work with?
Sure. I mean, that's a proposal stage. I mean, but it's usually by submitting. I share with them previous examples of my work. I have a portfolio that's tailored to that specific client. Whether maybe they're looking. It depends on what they're looking for, and I will tailor the portfolio to sort of to represent their needs. So that's really the primary thing, and then it's sort of seeing like again back to network, who do I know that knows them, that trying to talk to them a little bit more directly, but showing exactly how I'm different. I have to say at this point, um, I often don't really have to express that because they kind of know based on my work.
Mm,
If they've come to me, they usually already have an idea of what I'm good
yeah,
at.
right.
Um,
Well, that's the beauty of having them come to you. But
yeah, but yeah,
I think to your point, rather than thinking about how do I compare or differentiate from other people, it's like, just who am I and what is my style, what is my
good
approach, what
point.
is my value, what is my perspective, what is my, suggestion, what is my proposal for you. And if you focus on all those things, the other communication people don't matter because they're just listening to your advice at that point and your, who you are, what's your background. So I think getting really clear your background, your story, your positioning, who you help, how you help, why you help, right? And what you do and all those critical
Mhm.
pieces, you can start a mini little website for yourself to start to illuminate those elements of who you are as a person. If you don't already have a personal site, that's a great place to start helping you understand your own brand and positioning. But if you have your story clear, it might be irrelevant how you differ from other people because it's simply clear how you would help them. So I really like that.
Yeah.
Just on like an operational note, there's legal, there's administrative, there's other parts of thinking about even taxes. Thinking about what it means to freelance, invoicing, things like that. Sharon, like, do you kind of deal with some of that stuff, or do you feel like what? How do you help handle the other operational parts of not just like giving the service, but sort of running it as a business, whether it's the
Yeah.
financials or the legal or other components of it.
Yeah, I mean that's it's time consuming stuff and and doing it right is pretty important. It can save you a lot of money. And I have to admit, like sort of I've done that myself. I though now kind of I'm actually in the process of hiring a firm to do it for me because my business has scaled to the point where it's just beyond really what I can do and still run my business capably actually.
Yeah.
And that's great. There's so many wonderful services out there that are prepared to do it. But like I'm sort of right now looking into becoming just really kind of formalizing LLC, and then so I can file taxes as an S corp, which looks like will save me about, I mean, probably close to $12,000 a year. That's just being
Yeah.
numbers, that which is not chump change. So
Right.
things like that, and also like dealing with payroll. And I also imagine like in the next 2 years I have subcontractors, but it's likely that I'm going to be hiring some full-time people and building like a team. I need help with that.
Right.
And yeah, and honestly I don't want to do it. It's not my strength. Actually, my strength is
Right.
actually doing the work.
Right.
That Yeah, so that's the best use of me. So
Yeah, I mean, personally, I've hired, a recruiter to help me find team members. I, of course, have a bookkeeper, an accountant. I've leveraged fractional CFOs. I've, anything like that. So I personally, similar to you, Sharon, I think the key is like, what is your strength? What is not? And like, I knew from early on, I should never be touching QuickBooks, So it's okay to not be comfortable with certain things. Yes, you want to understand it enough, but if you need help, there's always ways and people to help you. So you are thinking more entrepreneurial about these things. In terms of legal entities,
yes.
personally, I always say you don't really need an LLC or a legal structure until you're sort of exchanging money and exchanging contracts. And if you are an LLC, you can file as if you're just an individual,
Hmm.
filing your taxes. But what a legal entity does is just give you protection. So if anything goes wrong and someone's going to sue you in the rare case that they will, that's what it does. It separates you from the business from a legal perspective. And it's actually very easy to get an LLC on LegalZoom. So, but a lot of lawyers will give you a free 30 minutes of their time in the initial, and same with accountants. So if you're not sure which entity or how to go about it or how it's going to impact your taxes or anything like that, just chat with a professional. They're often very willing to give you a free initial chat to get to know them, ask some questions, and then you'll see, is this a person I need right now to actually help me manage these things? And of course, there's so many other peers, mentors that you can get free advice from, of course. Sharon, when you charge clients, like, are you invoicing them, or is there a way that you sort of make it somehow automatic for yourself? I think the last thing people want to do is chase someone to pay them. How,
Yes.
how do you make that part easy?
Yeah, I mean that is absolutely the last thing you want to do. I do invoice regularly, but more to the point, I more likely work on a retainer format. And I actually have made it so that they're paying it at the beginning of the month rather than at the
Hmm.
end. So yeah, and because I mean sometimes I do have costs actually too,
Hmm.
coming in to get the work done.
Hmm.
So and I find like automating those payments, that has been sort of the best way, and everyone's peace of mind too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Absolutely. Yep. And look, if you're just getting started, I've done something where, okay, maybe for the first month, it's paid at the end of the month, but
yeah,
thereafter, it's always paid, in the beginning of the month, right? So you can get very creative with, look, if someone doesn't know you and they want to see your work and they want to make sure that this all works, there's
yeah,
different ways to be flexible early on versus how does this contract continue? If you need to get to know somebody for the first time and you want to land the contract and build their comfort, but see what they're willing to do. Of course, always, ask for the best case scenario.
that's true.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and if anyone has questions, please do raise your hand. I realize we are past the 2:40, mark here, and I'm gonna make sure I'm checking my DMs to see if anybody's messaging. But please do raise your hand, and if not, I will just simply keep going. Yeah, Sharon. I mean, you mentioned a little bit about your future plans and where the business is going. I mean, it sounds like you guys are growing. Is that kind of the goal, to kind of just expand this company and kind of keep getting new clients? Is that the vision?
You know, um, I mean, I have to be honest, like I mean, and I think you probably know, like it wasn't the original plan, but I'm having a lot of fun. So, and I'm getting really to work with the people I like. And so yeah, actually at this point, I mean, it's to the point that I can make it sustainable. I don't really want to be, I mean, it's basically I'm a little tiny agency. So, but, and I don't want to make it too big, but I do love the flexibility that I have. And it leaves room, so I am working full time, but with a great deal of flexibility, and it leaves time for other projects too that come in. So
Yeah.
I really like how, like right now, like I'm going to be, I've just taken, I'm going to be teaching this fall, in the Brooks School of Public Policy at Columbia University. I mean, sorry, Cornell. And that's exciting. I wouldn't have really have had time to do that if I wasn't really making my own schedule all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, I love it. And I love that there's diversity in what you're doing. Teaching, like, I think in today's career, it's like we just need different layers to us, the ability
Mhm.
to teach versus deliver services. You become this multifaceted person, and we can all think about, oh, there's a service and a sort of an expertise and a skill and a value we can deliver, but guess what, you can also teach the same thing to someone that's never learned that. So teaching is always a great layer to add on to the mix for a different set of income and a different, way to deliver your knowledge. I love
Yeah.
that. um any
Well,
advice you'd think about for somebody who's like on the fence and debating, should they go start freelancing or start a side hustle? Like, what would you say to someone?
Hmm. Well, I would say do take a hard look at your finances and be very, very honest about it to see, how long could you, sustain a business that's launching? Like when do you need to turn income? First, that's the first step. Just be brutally honest with yourself, and then sort of begin, and then look at your network and see how accessible that is. How much, and begin to identify people that could need your set of skills. I think it's also such a wonderful thing to realize. The best advice I got from somebody was that, you actually know a lot more than you think you know. Saying that like your work and your background is a commodity. You might not be used to thinking of it that way, but when you begin to sort of break it down, and maybe you do it with the help of a trusted friend or a mentor or something, like you actually, like every little sort of a sentence you have about your work life is a component of knowledge that you can share with somebody else, or that's potentially saleable.
Hmm.
So really kind of begin to break down your background and experience and realize it has a lot of value.
Yeah, I love it. When we look at our resume, we submit it for these online job postings, we think about ourselves as a full-time employee, but to your point, each line item on the resume or each line item of your background, each previous project, what does that same skill look like if you're delivering it in your own way for yourself, right? All of your past experiences can be delivered, it's just a different, format. So
Hmm.
yeah, and the financials is absolutely right. looking at your runway. But I think, sometimes even with entrepreneurship, like I took some part-time gigs, right? So I was a career coach for a few hours a week at a few different organizations, and I did that for a few years. And then eventually I said, I'm going to actually decide to not do those anymore, so I have more time to invest in my own business. But I was doing the career coaching for those side gigs while building up my company. So sometimes just having
Mm.
one part-time gig can afford like your living expenses, right? It depends
Yeah.
obviously what your expenses are, but something like that, can be a great way to allow you the time to go land your first client, right? Or
Yeah.
again, if you're doing a lot of full-time job search and you're searching for these big companies, what about just searching for other smaller agencies?
Hmm.
They're the ones finding clients and they're the ones finding the work, and then you're the one sort of course offering the service, but it's essentially a version of the same thing. Instead of you just finding those clients, you're being a part of a company like Sharon's or
Hmm.
whatever agency that relates to your area of expertise. So smaller boutiques, whether you go find those or even team up with some folks to build your own. Just thinking more scrappily and creatively about like who's getting the gigs and who's getting the work right now, and versus like I have this salaried role at this massive company and I have an online job posting, right? Finding the boutiques, of the folks that are landing project-based work. Can you be part of their roster
Hmm.
to deliver that service?
Yeah.
um, cool.
Well,
What are you most proud of in your freelance career?
oh, I mean, you know what? I think one of the things I really like is when doing like really good thought leadership with a client that just has a great story to tell, and and making that just sort of sing. There was a speech I did for a client for she was a keynote at a venture capital conference, and it was kind of like personal, but also like very like I don't know, just to raise her profile, and it worked, and it was just like people loved the story, and it was just and that's probably what I'm most proud of, like elevating somebody's story to like really be relevant to a lot of other people, to have it resonate. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, in your case, that's the output of your work. So when you get to see the impact, it's awesome. I love that. Um, any any other deals that fell through, like any other mishaps, any other sort of
well, I mean,
negatives, like any other
sure.
bad situations, stories that you needed to learn from?
Well, yeah, I mean, one, well, I mean, off the top of my head, I mean, about, let's see, gosh, the Davos
Of course, yeah.
that happens in Switzerland, the World Economic Forum thing. Actually, I ended with a client actually prior to it, and not in a bad way, but just because their expectations around that conference were, and I've having been to it, was just they were far beyond what was possible, in my opinion, and also just in my experience. And that was a little bit sad to say goodbye to that, but they were very, very clear. Like, I mean, I'll just give a very anecdotal example, but they wanted to basically publish a book and have it distributed at Davos, and publish the book like themselves, vanity published, and have it distributed like within like 2 months. And I just, based on my skills and like knowing that like publishing schedules work like this is how we can distribute stuff there. This is also how a vanity publication looks to people that we're planning to give it to. I was, and their vehemence to stick by that plan. I was like, you know what? I think it's just better if I pass you off to this person who might be able
Mm,
to help you better than me. So
hmm.
yeah, sure, there's troubles and hardships like that, but I think there's always a way to handle it elegantly and smoothly without really making much of a ripple.
Right.
Um,
I mean, I think it's having like a thick skin and a heavy stomach, because there could be, a contract that you do sign on to and it doesn't go well.
yeah,
Any
that's
number
true
of
too.
things can happen.
Yeah,
So it's the tolerating of risk. But these days, entering a full-time job could be just as risky with the way that layoffs happen. And so I think you're just transitioning how you embrace uncertainty and how you really trust your own skills to say, how would I vet a client, right? Instead of having this other job choose me, how would I go choose and seek out my own clients? And how do I create my own success, essentially?
yeah,
How do I create a contract and a proposal that I know is going to deliver success to this client? What do I know about this field what should my proposal be? You get to choose and trust yourself, right? Versus following some manager who, tells you to do something that you don't think makes sense,
Right.
in the workplace, right? So you get to control the everything really. But I think people think of the freelancing world as just so risky
Mm-hmm.
versus, like how can I see it as, oh, actually, I just have high control,
Yeah.
over things, and maybe embrace the power of what comes from that, and creating the outcomes from that. Versus, we search for these full time roles, we're getting rejected for things we're qualified for. We're not getting interviews, or we get interviews but no offers. Again, when we're qualified, there's just so much going on in this job search market that doesn't make sense when people are qualified. So I think it's just thinking differently about where the value is, where the work is, how do you show up for yourself, having a personal website, and
Mm-hmm.
being entrepreneurial, whether you're ready or not, and just embracing it, and just know that you can go slow. If somebody is talking contracts and you're not sure what to do, ask questions. Tell them, let me look into that and I'll get back to you. Like, we're sort of making it up a little. You never need to do something that you're not sure of or you're not comfortable with. But entrepreneurship to me is about embracing the ambiguity and just like making it up, but you make it up in a way that feels right to you as a person. You still have your knowledge, your expertise, your integrity, your professionalism. You get to choose the brand of your company. It's the brand of you as a professional, but you get to, think about how you're asking a company, what's your culture? You get to create your own culture of what it is you offer and who you work with, right? So there's just so much power. I think people assume it's so scary and all that kind of stuff. So I just want to show how, it can be better perhaps than the other way, and especially when it's hard enough in the job market today. So I hope this, showed people the light a little bit and the positivity that can come from, being on your own. Sharon, any last words? Did we not mention anything that's top of mind that you think people should know or think about?
I can't think of something right now. I mean, it's just like what you said about it can be better. Like, yeah, actually. And I mean, I'm not averse to a full-time role, but I'm having a lot of fun doing this. And I was very nervous about it, but it worked out very differently than I thought it would. So it just, stay positive and you can make it roll. So,
Yeah, I
yes.
love it. I love it so much. And the positive experience you're having, that's the thing. People, it might seem scary at first, but like, yeah, what if it's way better? You lean into yourself as a person and a professional versus beholden to any other company. And I know people often look to that, oh, I want to start a company someday, one day. I think sometimes people see it like this big mountain and it's this big thing. Take one step at a time. Start small, start scrappy, and recognize your past experience is probably more than relevant to just start doing the freelancing today with the skills that you have. So try to figure out like what is something that feels a little more feasible, a little more doable, within the skill set I have today. So I hope this made it seem a little less scary for all of those of you out there. And we will be back for more on Fishbowl. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Rachel Serwetz, and find our company. We are on most social media accounts, either at Woken or at Get Woken. Our website is iamwoken.com. We always offer a free initial call. So if you need any support pursuing your own path, please reach out and book some time with us. Um, and we'll be back for more on Fishbowl. We always talk about different career topics, and making sure you have as much raw, real, direct, practical advice as humanly possible. And we'll also have the recording available as well. Sharon, how can people find you and get in touch with you?
Yeah, people can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to chat, if they need any thoughts. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And please come back again next time. We hope to see you. Please reach out. We're here to help. And I hope this lifted your day just a little bit. So we'll be back with more, and come find us again, and have a great day, everybody.